Good morning. My name is Jen Goad. I'm the Senior Director of EEO and Regulatory Compliance for Charter Communications. I am also a member of this year's conference committee. I am excited to introduce our next session, HR Leading Through the Pandemic. The panel will discuss lessons learned, lasting impacts, and the future of work. Before I introduce our speakers, I want to remind everyone that 1, the session will be recorded and the recording will be available at the conclusion of the conference. 2, we will have a Q&A at the end of this session. Please feel free to post your questions throughout the session using the Ask button located at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. We have a dynamic panel of Charter Communications HR leaders with us today. If you can please advance the screen. If we can please advance the screen, I'd like to introduce Paul Marchand, Executive Vice President and Chief Human Resources Officer. Robyn Alper, Vice President, Human Resources for Customer Operations. Danielle Gaston, Vice President, Human Resource for Communications. And Suki Parsons, Vice President, Human Resources for Spectrum Networks. Let's get this session started. I'll turn it over to you, Paul.
Thanks very much, Jen. And good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. And as Jen shared, we're going to spend the next 50 minutes talking a bit about how Charter has navigated through the pandemic, through COVID-19. It's kind of interesting to actually be on a panel and be talking about this with all of you today, as we aren't actually through the pandemic. As everybody's reading the headlines and seeing what's coming out on a daily basis in the general news media and from our government officials, state and federal level, cases have continued to rise. This week, we had an announcement of a second vaccine that's going through the trial stages and hopefully for FDA approval. And, the economy continues to be choppy. So we aren't quite through the pandemic. Maybe we're at the halfway point. Needless to say, Charter has been actively engaged in facing the pandemic and working through all of its challenges since February. Since we first heard of the case, of a case that took place and came here domestic, and the virus spread, we've been actively working on navigating through this pandemic. And this panel that Jen introduced and that I'm pleased to be hosting is going to talk a bit about their experiences individually, and then we'll take some Q&A amongst the panel and then reach out to the actual audience to get some feedback. So a bit about myself. So I lead HR for Charter Communications, which is Fortune 100 communications provider, broadband, video, mobile, landline phone service. I've been here for 5 years. And I have about 30 years of HR experience. And in that 30 years, I lived through quite a bit of change and quite a number of events. So the market crash of '87, the dot-com boom, and then the Y2K event, 9/11, the ultimate market correction, the housing crisis in the mid to late 2000 period, large-scale M&A here at Charter when I first joined. But really nothing that I just mentioned is equal to, maybe all of them put together, but nothing is equal to, as a single event, what we've experienced in this pandemic. The scale, global, the breadth, reaching all parts of society, from younger children all the way to the elderly, all economic classes impacted, lives lost, lives changed. I mean, we really are going to see a lasting impact of the pandemic for years and years to come. But I am proud of the organization that I work for and that I'm helping to lead from a functional perspective, the HR organization. I'm proud of Charter as a company. I'm proud of the HR team. And I'm really proud of our more than 70,000 frontline workers, whether they're a call center representative that's working multiple shifts during the day or through the weekends, whether it's field technicians that are going out to service customers, install, support, repair, whether it's our mobile sales and mobile store representatives, including middle and back office of the company. Everybody's working together to keep our customers front and foremost and front and center for what we do. So I think Charter has taken this challenge head on. We are an entertainment company providing a lot of wonderful services and wonderful products, as you see in the next slide. But we really have to shift to being focused on, being essential, which is what we do. And we're used to doing that. We're used to doing that in things like fires and things like hurricanes and storms, outages and things like that. But nothing as sustained and as dramatic and as far-reaching as the pandemic. But we're fortunate that we have a great playbook as a company, a business playbook, an operating playbook. We're fortunate that we have an amazing leadership team of tenured individuals who have lived through a lot of those events that I talked about up front and really had perspective and balance and care and consideration and were measured in going through it. So we really saw it as a battle, as something that we were going to go after and focus on and sort of address. Next slide, please. So today we're going to talk about that journey. We're going to talk about our experience since March, what we've learned. Again, we're probably at the halfway point with more to come, both in managing COVID, but also then the vaccines that are going to come out and how are we going to ensure that we get the vaccines and keep our workers safe and help, help society. So I'm going to turn it now to Danielle Gaston. Danielle is part of our corporate HR team and really came into a role initially leading communications for HR, but had to pivot in the last 9 months to kind of be the PMO office for all the work that kind of came front and center. As you may have participated in a previous panel that I was on, I talked about quarterbacking the pandemic, and that's really what HR did and has been doing at Charter. Of course, the business is critical, but we've been really quarterbacking it, and sort of my right-hand person and the key person was Danielle. And so Danielle, I'll turn it to you to talk a little about how you handle it and manage it from your perspective, and then we'll pivot and talk to both Robyn and Suki. Danielle?
Great, thanks, Paul. I think we could advance a couple of slides. Yep, to the next one. Great. So as Paul mentioned, companies of our size have dealt with a lot of crises in the past, but when it came to a pandemic that was coming from another country, and we expected it was going to hit us very quickly, HR got into that driver's seat really fast. This was about employee health and how were we going to deal with it. So it was very different than a financial crisis or other things that we've experienced. So as Paul said, we really dug in February and we set up a cross-functional team of experts from all different parts of the business, from our health and safety team who could translate what the CDC was putting out so that we could understand it and act on it, to our legal team and government affairs, procurement, and supply chain. So we knew we had to get supplies and we had to get them out to the companies, so they needed to be, at a seat at the table. And then keeping our business leaders engaged along with our business unit HR leads, which you'll hear from Suki and Robyn. We needed to meet regularly, we needed to monitor what was going on externally, and we needed to make sure that we were putting our plans in place so that we could react. Our priorities were around getting PPE for all of our 95,000 employees, focusing on employee well-being, making sure that we were communicating so employees were hearing straight from us, and continuing to recruit and hire because our business was going to need to make sure that we had all of our seats filled. If you can move to the next slide. We're a complex and large organization, so it was really important that we established guidelines that kept everybody in lockstep. So as Paul talked about before, we are big on having our playbooks and making sure that everybody knows how we're going to run the place. So we put no visitor policies in place very quickly, and we limited travel. We stood up our remote work guidelines. We put in place a number of time off policies from flex time to paid administrative leave. We established protocols for COVID accommodations. And we made a number of benefit changes from not charging for diagnostic tests, making telehealth visits free for all employees in our medical options, And we made sure that promoting our mental health resources was a part of our steady drumbeat of communication. We also quickly virtualized the recruiting process and navigated slowdowns and pre-employment checks. I mean, courts were closed and we still needed to make sure that we could go through those processes. And we hired 4,500 people in a matter of a couple of months using all new virtual processes. We also needed to develop tools in order to track our incidents and understand what was going on with our employees, to be able to report to the organization, build in downstream responses, including cleaning and communications, and facilitate contact tracing. And those things that I covered, we had stood up by the middle of March. And we used that playbook and continue to enhance it as we've gone along. But that was really the core of it all happened really early on in the year. And then we needed to focus on operational guidelines. So how were we going to make sure that we kept our employees feeling comfortable about coming to work? And that included things like face coverings for everyone, daily health screenings, building occupancy rates, making sure that we were meeting state guidelines and that we had signage in place for social distancing and that we had PPE available. Next. One of the most important operational guidelines was around, number of state orders coming in and saying we needed to be doing health checks and we needed to do temperature checks. So we took the approach of a one-size-fits-all, and we leaned on our HR technology team to build us a tool that allowed us to do that. We are asking every employee, and have been since around Memorial Day, that if they're coming into the office, they're going into the field, they complete this daily health check that can be done on their telephone, on the internet, and for our field technicians, we built the same tool in their handheld devices so that they can do it before they even get their work order. This innovation was really unique. It's built in our PeopleSoft system, and it's something that really has been unique coming out of this entire process. There wasn't anything out there that we could go buy, so we had to build it ourselves. Next. We also, as I said, communications is really important. So we built this section on our intranet where we put all of our communications and updates, and we kept it fresh and updated it very fluidly. And I think one of the things that I would just point out here is that we were very honored to be recognized by Forbes in their ranking of top employers for their response to the pandemic. So we worked really hard to make sure that we kept our business running and that our employees' well-being was at the forefront, and it was nice to be recognized for that. Next. So just to touch quickly on, from a corporate HR perspective, what we learned and what I think will last is innovation was really important. We leaned into different individuals and their strengths, and we let the experts do their thing. We removed the red tape. We removed a lot of the layers that you'd normally go through, and we let people get things done, and it definitely paid off for us. As a communicator, I always talk about simple, timely, and relevant communications are important and center to what we do. It's even more important in a crisis, and make sure that you've got the channels in order to do that. And I think more so as we look forward, it's really learning how to anticipate what's coming. I don't think any of us thought we'd still be in this in October when we sat back in March talking about our plans. And I think we now have much more of a foundation for where we're going to go and what we need to do if something like this happens again. But as HR leaders, how do we continue to look and anticipate what's coming so we can be much more proactive in the future? So with that, I will turn it over to Robyn, who leads HR for our call centers.
Thanks, Danielle. You can advance 2 slides, actually. So we were fortunate enough from an operations perspective to take everything Danielle just spoke about and implement it. And so we were the recipients of a lot of the work that Danielle just mentioned. I wanted to set the stage of what our organization looks like. We're a 24/7 operation with just about 20,000 employees that operate in 41 sites around the United States. And prior to COVID, we were all in center. We did not have a work at home program. And it probably would have taken us about a year to put one into place. And we were able to get folks home to help with business continuity in about 2 weeks. So we became more nimble. I'm very proud of our team, and a shout out to all of our HR folks that might be on this panel discussion this morning, and the work that they did and acted quickly to get our employees to be able to work safely both in center and at home. You can advance the slide. So now we had 2 ways of working, but 1 employee experience. And this diagram really sets the stage for what we had to think about with regards to our on-site and our remote employees. We had to think about logistics. How do we deploy folks to work at home? Who gets to work at home and who stays on-site? We had to think about equipment and how do we deploy the equipment home safely, help our employees to connect and to service our customers. How do we continue to handle the call volume at all hours of the day? And how do we keep morale going both in center and out and work at home? We also had to think about home challenges. Just because people went to work remotely didn't mean it removed all the challenges like isolation, distractions, conflict that might occur in the home. And then how do we help folks stay connected to our culture? Next slide. So all of this felt to us like we were changing the wheels on a moving vehicle. And every day, this hit us very hard and very fast, and we were in a balancing act. Looking at business continuity, as you can imagine, and I tell my friends, you certainly don't want folks working at home, remote education, and what we all relied upon for entertainment, not to be able to continue while everyone was working at home. So we had to think about how to keep the wheels on the car. And we brought our subject matter experts together to get our employees home safely and quickly. We had to think about our leaders wanting to do the right thing and to make sure our employees felt safe. And we also wanted to make sure that they were safe and their families were safe and they were considerate of their coworkers. So next slide. So what were our lessons learned from an operations standpoint? We actually stood outside of our playbook because we were not, again, a work at home model. So we had to think about logistics when equipment wasn't readily available and it was a 6 to 8 week time frame. We cleared every closet, we cleared every workstation that we could to make sure that we were be able to set up social distancing in our sites. We had to think about the processes that we put in place to, again, continue the business, create social distancing, which way was in the buildings, which way were out of the buildings, how do we create that safe work environment, and how did we create those remote working procedures? How did employees take their equipment home? How did they bring it back if they weren't able to work at home any longer? How did we do training? Our training was always within 4 walls, and our training became virtual in center, both and at home. And then how did we recruit? We did virtual hiring events, drive-through hiring events, virtual interviewing. These were all things that we had not practiced in the past. And then as far as engagement was concerned, we held customer service week virtually, and we're big foodies and we provide food to our employees on a regular basis. How did we do that both in center safely and make sure that we kept our employees at home engaged in the process? And we were also able to celebrate our Spectrum Gold, which is our employee recognition event, which normally we take our employees away. We had to postpone twice, and then eventually we did it on a virtual basis. And we were able to bring our 300 winners together for a virtual presentation when we were all able to connect over a virtual presentation of our senior leaders, and then individually recognize each of our employees. So these are things that we might actually consider taking forward into the future. And these were the lessons learned and the future of our work, at least until, as Paul mentioned, we see the other end of this pandemic. And now I'll turn it over to Suki to talk about Spectrum Networks.
Thanks, Robyn. So we can go to the next slide. So Spectrum Networks is a little bit of a different organization within our ecosystem. We are sort of the dedicated content, or one of the dedicated content organizations, and we focus on news. And so, giving some background, we are a 24/7 operation. We have over 30 plus hyper sort of local stations, small team of about 1,700, about 40% of those are journalists. And so they're out in the field covering all of these stories. So when the pandemic hit, where you were sending your employees became very important because they were covering the news of the day. We've launched about 16 new, sort of sites and newsrooms since 2018. And we've been in this journey for a while, so we could go to the next slide. So we were sort of on this really transition and process, sort of nice path. We were establishing our new linear approach. We were expanding in Texas. We had an app approved in the beginning of January. And so we're going through this nice journey. And then if you go to the next slide, hyperspace. It became, just full throttle hyperspace. And anyone who is a Star Wars fan knows that if you don't have the right coordinates, sort of end up in that asteroid field. And that's where we felt we were. Social justice was coming, our app launch was coming, uncertainty, getting our right PPE, our standards and practices of how journalists sort of, do they wear the mask on air, do they not? Our programming model around Black Lives Matter and what was important to us. We were just sort of inundated with change in one specific time. And, we sort of really needed to sort of understand how we navigate through this crisis. And we really sort of took our time. We focused on what was important. We studied the organization, and we really made sure employee safety was the most important for us. So that's sort of how we led and managed sort of through it. And if you want to go to the next slide. We sort of have gotten into this natural gate right now where we sort of adapt, convert, and then And when I put this together, Danielle was like, what does mean? And I was like, it doesn't matter. We either revisit, we reorganize, we do these other different things to sort of realign ourselves. And this really gave us a couple of different things in this period, right? We had a great willingness to experiment. And, our organizations have been really legacy organizations, had a really sort of quick way of working or a steady way of working. And we sort of took that, and in 2 weeks' time, just like Robyn mentioned, we were in a full remote sort of situation. We had anchors, working from home and being live on TV. We had master control sort of navigating all of our ingest and how things go live on TV. We're also really good at the what if now. We do a lot of scenario planning. So we sort of look at things and say, well, what if this happens? Where do we need to go? And it really sort of provides us some direction. And I always say we are developing sort of robust yet plausible strategies, right? Where giving that sort of plausible strategy allows you to be grounded at the time, right? Allows you to sort of focus and navigate of what's important. And our role is being essential into the lives of our consumers. And with the pandemic, governors took much more of an active role on TV, right? We were covering all of these news stories to get this information out to our employees. And so we really sort of go through this model. And if anyone on my team is on the call, they'll know sometimes it's daily and sometimes we sort of stick. But we're constantly sort of understanding how we adapt, convert, and then reimagine, reassess, realign through every day, because being journalists, we're covering things that are happening and getting it out a little bit ahead of the curve, or hopefully informing our consumers. And so that's where we really went through it. Back to you, Paul.
No, that's great. Thank you. So, no, I like the and I like the what if. There were a lot of great nuggets there from Danielle talking about establishing some foundational things that the organization in aggregate could really leverage and benefit and tap into, to hearing about how Robyn in a very large, multi-site workforce had to think about both on-site, off-site, how to operationalize sort of the accommodation, having people work remote, and manage through that, both engagement and hiring and retention and training. And then you had Suki talk a little bit about, a very different model of a business, a different size of business, but a very important business in the sense that they are our front line for covering local stories and the communities we serve. And they had to sort of pivot in what they were doing, probably already pivoting, as she described, changing the model, but the pandemic seemed to have fastened or quickened that change. So let's go to some questions, and Jen's joined us. And don't forget, if you have a question, you can go to the bottom left hand side of the event app to submit your questions to Jen, and we will take them. But we'll kick it off with some questions now, and use the next 25 plus minutes to do Q&A for the group. So I'm very interested. The company itself has performed very well. We have decided that our playbook is to support our hourly workers, our frontline workers, and here in the corporate centers or here in the business unit offices, be available, be working. But you each lead teams, large HR functioning teams spread out across the United States. How has your role as an HR leader really changed during this pandemic? Are there things specifically that you've had to do differently than you might have done in the past? Muscles you've had to sort of strengthen or rely upon that you didn't necessarily have to in the past? And I'll start with Robyn. Maybe you could go first and shed any light on anything that you did or had to do uniquely as an HR leader.
Sure, thanks, Paul. I would say it didn't change as much as it intensified. I mean, we really were command central 24/7. My laptop was open all the time, especially at the very beginning, and responding often. I wish I had gone to medical school at some point so that I could have provided guidance. And thankfully, we had someone on our team that was really good at going and giving us that information. So I was able to seek out the experts, which I feel like I've always done, but I did it even more in this scenario.
Great, that's awesome. Suki, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I would just echo that. I mean, I think we all became involved in so many different things. And even in my business, programming also became something that HR was involved in, right? How we looked at our programming, what's our schedule, what was our model. So, we stretched into deep into other places, and then you're recalling hand sanitizer on the other day, right? And you're, trying to make sure somebody's set up at home in the right way. So it was just navigating it. And I think being accessible, was key for all of us to work together.
I'm hearing sort of the developing some new levels of expertise. The pandemic, obviously, a medical related sort of event, learning about what it is, how do you get it, how do you transmit it, what are the CDC rules and guidelines. And while we could do some of that for you in the aggregate, a lot of that was happening on the ground for you, but also juggling, a lot of sort of multitasking and juggling, maybe at a premium. In HR, we typically do a lot of that. We do the strategic work as well as the day-to-day tactical work, and we're juggling all those different balls. This puts sort of premium on it, to your point, Robyn, of sort of the laptop, the emails, the texting, kind of always on, always available 24/7. Danielle, what did you see from the center, and what thoughts from you in terms of how you saw the other HR leaders or yourself, change during the pandemic?
Yeah, I think the level of collaboration that, normally, we've designed programs, we align, we talk about what we need to do, and those things take a lot of time. I think in this, there was such a high level of trust between each other that when we sat down and said, all right, well, we're going to roll out this policy and here's how it's going to work, I think the different HR leaders for all the businesses trusted that we had their employees in mind and their business continuity in mind, that we could move quickly. So I think the trust and collaboration that we were able to really take advantage of in this helped us be very swift in our response. So I think that we've all learned to work together in a different way and really rely on each other.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Robyn a specific question to that, building on that point. And I love the notion of the trust and the collaboration, which is really something that we were working on even pre-pandemic as a functioning group. Not all HR reports into me. HR reports into the business, and Robyn's a great example of that, reporting up into the business. Robyn, just a question for you. We sort of announced in, I guess it was around March, no, maybe it was around April, that we were going to make a dramatic shift in the way we thought about frontline pay. How did you then have to receive that information and sort of translate, explain, operationalize that, and what impact did it have for your workforce? Because there's a lot of announcements that were being made by companies, one-time bonuses, time off, everybody go remote, go, go home, run to the hills. That wasn't necessarily our approach. We took our approach, and I'd love to hear how you sort of saw it come to action.
Yeah, so I think it was really important for us to understand that we wanted to make a conscious approach in what we were doing. So everyone was looking and saying, what's Charter going to do? What is the company going to do? And when we were able to provide that information, we were able to take the message of the increase in pay and operationalize it and say, this is what we felt was really important for our employees. And it truly helped our employees stay engaged. It helped our leaders to give a good message during a time that was really difficult, and it enabled us to attract more workers because we still had jobs to fill, and it certainly helped retention.
So we were at $15 an hour, which we had announced a number of years ago and implemented really ahead of the curve. Then the pandemic hits, and then we jumped to a commitment to get to 20 by 2022. But you guys were also going to go ahead and move forward. So you took it to $16.50, right? $1.50.
Correct. $16.50.
Okay. Which really clearly made a difference for you. So let me shift gears a little bit, and Jen, kind of keep your eyes open on any key questions that we're going to turn to you in a bit here. So the pandemic is here. We're dealing with it. We're dealing with COVID-19. The vaccines are coming. We're managing through it. Serving our customers, installations, taking calls, sort of reporting on news. What do you see as some of the longer lasting impacts from the pandemic emerging? And maybe even with the HR lens that you kind of lead and own, that you can see for us or sort of look into the crystal ball of the future. So Danielle, I'll start with you first. Maybe you could give us some thoughts on what you're seeing or what you predict or where you think this is going.
Oh, I mean, I think that our role as strategic business partners really came much more into focus through this. I think a lot of times when you're running the day-to-day, it can be very operational, and we get opportunities to do big things sort of cyclically. And I think the fact that the organization across the board was looking to HR to guide them and make sure that we were doing the right things for employees, while knowing that we were essential and that we couldn't take our eye off the ball. We had to still serve our customers, and we needed people to come to work. So I think it's that strategic business partner role that I hope will continue to stay sort of elevated in what we do and how we do it.
So the experience, the event, the period of time has sort of cemented this notion of being a strategic functional group that still has very important operational administrative things that have to get done. But okay, that's good. That's good. That's a positive change or a positive long-lasting impact. Suki?
From a business perspective, we really learned what true agility was, right? I think we always had this concept of we're so agile and we can sort of navigate this. And now you really know what true agility is because you're flipping very quickly. I think another important thing in our group was leadership accessibility. We really made our leaders more available, and I don't think that will go backwards, right? We focused on the EQ, we focused on how they outreach and know their employee a little bit better, right? Because we had to know the whole employee a little bit better during this pandemic, not just the one that shows up to work every day, because we all had different issues going on in our lives when the pandemic hit. So I think that was important for us. And evolving sort of the expectations of our workforce, right? So will shifts stay the same, right? Because of cleaning, right? We had to change our shifts because we had to give enough time for people to come in and out of the office. So people like those new shifts, right? So I think HR really is going to be able to sort of look at those things and help sort of drive those changes. And at least in our organization, I think those are some things that we got out of it.
I love the testing of the agility. That's definitely this has been a time where we've had to been hugely agile, if that's kind of the right wording there. Danielle can correct me on the communication. Robyn, to you, any thoughts on long-lasting impacts you see emerging from your pandemic? Do you see, the way you guys operate in customer operations changing permanently, or do you just see it as now we're really nimble? We can kind of turn on a dime. We can react and respond to anything that comes our way if we could do that.
I I think we didn't think we could do it, and now we can. So I think that there's probably nothing that could get thrown at us that we couldn't handle. And again, having the right people helping the business to adapt is really important. And it's a true balancing act, really, to keep the business, keep the lights on and keep business continuity going, and really caring for our employees is just a critical piece that our leaders really, and sometimes you sway to one side or the other, and then you have to come back to the middle and make sure that we're, focused on everything. So I think it kind of definitely had that ability to balance everything going forward.
Danielle, you when you did your little session here, you talked about accommodations. Can you tell us a little bit more what that actually means? Can you peel back the onion on what accommodations meant for us at Charter? What was our definition of that?
Yeah. So we look at accommodations in 3 categories. We've got the employee has a health risk, they have a family member with a health risk, or something new we had to really respond to quickly was school closures. So really we were looking at, we put in a number of measures to keep social distancing in the building, such as remote work rotations. And as, Robyn talked about, they had people working both in centers and from home. But we wanted to give employees who had concerns or needs to work remotely the opportunity to have that type of accommodation approved. So we built a process. This is different than ADA accommodations that are in the base case, but this was really around looking for employees who needed to protect themselves or family members and were looking for a remote work schedule.
So rather than sort of a one-size-fits-all, it was let's listen to each of the employees' needs and concerns, and let's respond to them accordingly. If they can, they can match up to those buckets. We'll accommodate. No, that's great. Jen, is there a question that you feel sort of the group needs to take head on that you've got sent in so far?
So we have received a few questions. Thank you, Paul. So along those lines, we did have a question. How are you thinking about future of work in relation to people needing to be in the office, or are you recruiting and not having people move?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with the general response to that, and then anybody who would like to chime in, I'll turn to you. Just give me a raise hand. Look, I'm a huge believer that when people come together physically, when they are in the same space, whether it's open workspace, offices, conference rooms, hallways, you get a dynamic, vibrant, interactive experience. You get verbal, nonverbal, you get relationship building, you get problem solving, you address issues that could take 15 emails or 5 conference calls, kind of solved in the moment at the time, right away. I certainly think there's certain functions that lend themselves better to being in person together. Creative functions, innovative functions, building functions, but also think about workforces where you have to lead teams of people and they need constant training and constant coaching and constant support. So all those things I think have to get thrown into the mix. And I don't think it's a one side versus the other side. I think there's something flexible in the middle that will ultimately wash out over time and over the type of business and the geography and over the different generations that are working. So I would say I'm not all that pleased that companies are being so provocative to say you never need to come back to an office place. Okay, I wouldn't want to be quoted on that because I'm not looking to be controversial, but I think that's pretty bold, and I think that's potentially a little damaging. I think about it similarly as, how do kids like to learn? Kids like to learn in school. I mean, I think that we're seeing that as the best option. And despite the pandemic, we would all want our kids to be safe and in school and learning from a teacher and being with their cohort and experiencing what each other's capabilities can bring to the equation. So I'm a proponent of that. I'm a proponent of us as a society coming together in the workplace, and collaborating and innovating and building relationships and evolving, business practices and strategies. Comments from Suki, comments from Robyn, Danielle, you can certainly disagree with perspective, but that's kind of, I thought I'd answer it that way, Jen.
Thank you, Paul.
Suki, Robyn, Danielle?
Paul, I think one thing that we'll take away or kind of continue for the future is the virtual nature of training, thinking outside the box, whether that's virtual at home or virtual within the site, considering that we may never get back to a side-by-side environment. We agree that from a cultural perspective, it's really helpful to have everyone in the centers, but we can think differently about how could we train virtually. I believe every conversation about any type of training at this point, we think about virtual, not necessarily e-learn, but virtual training. So that's something that I think will be a key takeaway for us in the future.
That's great.
I think we all sort of realize the real value of technology, right? And what it can do now daily. But, so one of the changes that will be lasting for us is that we have our multimedia journalists who will be staying out in the field. We gave them all iPhones, they're shooting, they're editing, and we want them embedded in their communities, right? To tell the stories of the communities and to be essential to that community. So, but it's not, again, I agree with you, Paul, one size fits all. There's certain roles that are better, and there's better production value, and there's better things that are being in the office or being accessible to the offices. So I think it's going to be tried and true. But I think now, again, since we have our playbook, whether we spike or not, we're prepared to sort of navigate it, right? Which I think is crucial for us.
Great. Thank you. Jen, and is there another question?
Yep, so we've got a few more, but sticking with the accommodation theme, we did receive another one. Are you doing anything special to accommodate parents and their specific needs?
Yeah, I think, Danielle, you touched upon that, right? And so if we have parents who have kids in school, I think we're accommodating the fact that some schools are hybrid, some schools are fully remote, and if their job allows for that to work at home situation allows that to happen, we will accommodate for that as we kind of navigate through the pandemic.
Thank you, Paul.
Other questions?
Yes. So we did receive one, and this was based on what you shared, Robyn. How do you conduct a drive-through hiring event? What does it look like?
Robyn, tell us about, I wrote it down, drive-through. I was thinking, we're staying in the movie theater. It's now drive-through movie theater. What's a drive-through recruiting event?
Right, and so it's meeting folks as they were coming through. Obviously, we pre-schedule. Folks don't have to actually come into the site, although we did learn that providing a virtual tour of our work locations was really helpful. So a lot of our locations have created YouTube virtual tours so people can see what the site looks like. But really, it's truly a drive-up event. You get information, packets of information, and learn more about the job from individuals who can be lined up outside and tell folks about the job and talk to people about their work experience. So it's truly like a flu shot drive-through, not like the COVID testing drive-through.
Do like lines of cars and people just come up 5 minutes and then pull away, 5 minutes, then pull away?
Yeah, because they were pre-scheduled. So.
Pre-scheduled. That's awesome. So you got the social distancing, but you have some human interaction.
Correct.
Got it. Awesome.
That is great. Thank you, Robyn. We did have another question. So with our employees used to potlucks and celebrations, what do you find works best to keep your employees engaged in this environment?
Food.
Those kinds of things, it's just more packaged, right? Like we're still doing those kind of things, still having celebrations, just creating ways for to be less, more individual serving, so to speak, but still theming things, still creating that same kind of environment within the center, and then being able to create packets or all-in-one mailings to our employees at home to be able to create that same culture for our folks that are not in the center.
Jen, I'll throw one out there on that question, and I stole it from somebody, and probably it's not something that's such a earth-shattering concept, but I'm doing it. It's hard to keep up, but I'm doing it, and that's actually writing a card and putting a postage stamp on it and dropping it in the mail.
Wow.
And talk about, sort of like, number one, it takes time. I actually have to think about what I'm going to write. I have to think about the person that I'm writing to. It's that personal experience that Robyn just referenced in a drive-by. So it's a one-on-one experience. Secondarily, it gets sent to the home address as opposed to a work address. So it's connecting to them in the spaces in which they live with their other family, loved ones, partners, etc. And it's personal, right? And hopefully it stands out, right? In the fast-paced world and digital technology world, which I'm totally supportive of, we're here on this Zoom panel and happy we're doing it this way. I actually do miss the audience interaction, right? We would be laughing, we would be joking, we'd be pointing to an audience member. We don't have that benefit, but I think doing things sometimes, in an intimate, personal way, could be impactful. So write a card to somebody, a coworker, a direct report. If they have a celebration, if they have a promotion, if they join the organization, do those things. I know a person, not with Charter, but I know a person who recently joined a company, and it was a virtual hiring situation. And the first day went by, the second day went by, and it wasn't until the third day in the morning that they got an actual connection to their manager. Now that would never have happened in person, on site, in an office setting. Okay. Now the manager, had a reason for the delay, but if you think about it, the technology should have been there where it should have been an easy way to just welcome that person. But that person's experience in that first few days was really negative, right? And they really felt non-connected, not valued, lost. What do I do? Where do I go? I'm here, kind of thing, but they're really at their home. So we have to take the extra care and the extra attention to kind of connect with people. Food helps, but one-on-one connection helps.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, another one?
Those are the questions we've received.
All right,
so
I'm going to
far.
throw one out to the group. If you had one word to describe 2020, and I acknowledge that we still have a month and a half to go, so you can sort of, paraphrase this a bit. But one word to describe 2020, what word would it be? Danielle.
Growth. So I think this was a year of growth. I have other words, but I don't think they're appropriate. Both, I think, professionally and personally, relationships grew in different ways. I think we had to work a little bit harder to engage with each other. Social interaction, I think the pandemic and stay at home and all of that can be really isolating. So it was great to be connected with people in different ways and doing Zoom happy hours with our friends, and just trying to be connected. So I think there was growth in a lot of ways. I think professionally, the challenges that I personally went through this year in managing a communication function and quarterbacking this with you, it was a 24-hour job a lot of the time, but I think in that comes the adrenaline. It's different than an M&A kind of adrenaline, but the work we did was important. So I think through all of those challenges, there's always the growth at the end. So growth is my word.
Great word. Robyn, what do you got?
I got two, sorry. One was historical. So really this created a lot of conversation, right, about a lot of different topics we haven't talked about. So, and think of the things that happened this year besides the pandemic that created that historical. And then I actually borrowed that word from my husband, and then I said hysterical because we laughed. We kept humor at the forefront. I mean, even when things were very serious, we tried to keep it light for all of us because there were some really serious situations that happened that we had to be very careful about. But so historical and hysterical were my two words.
I like that, the two H's. Suki, what do you got?
Hysterical would have been a different way for me, Robyn. I think this year for me has been intense, right? And not intense in a positive and negative way, right? It's intense work, it's intense family time, it's intense, everything. So I think, I have 3 school-age elementary kids. And homeschooling was intense, when it first happened. And, work is intense. And when you're in HR during this, right, you're front and center on game. So that 24/7 model was just relentless at times, but it was intense community, right? It was intense, did I say family already? Yeah. A lot of intense family time. So, that's how I would describe it.
Well, hats off to you for juggling work and being a mom of young kids. Danielle as well, a mom. Robyn, your situation's a little different. They're a little older, right? But all of you, hats off to the great job you've done as well. And Jen, not forgetting you, doing good work. I got one or two more questions before we wrap it up from our side. The COVID kind of time frame gave us a lot of time alone at home, hunkered down, sheltered in place. Just curious about a skill that you might have picked up along the way, your favorite go-to entertainment outlet, or a favorite food. You don't have to do each one of those, but just give us a sense of, like, from a personal perspective, as you all hunkered down, what did you find out? What did you learn? What did you start doing?
My 11-year-old and I both learned to ride bikes.
Wow. Good for you.
Okay.
So yes, I'm an adult and I could not. Put me on a Peloton, no problem. 2 wheels down the street. Started that for the first time. So
was that like your husband kind of behind you, pushing you and running as you were riding the bike? Is that the image I'm supposed to have?
No, we taught Katie to ride first, and then she coached me in how to do it.
Okay. The younger generation.
Impressive.
The older
Yeah.
generation. That's great.
Yeah.
Robyn, what do you got?
I perfected my pie baking. So it wasn't necessarily something I didn't do before, but I have made multiple pies and they've come out really well. I've been very happy with the product.
And you're ready for the big holiday festivals coming up here.
Yes. I am
That's a pie.
looking forward to it.
That's the pie Super Bowl, isn't it?
Yeah, there is, I'm sure.
Suki, what do you got?
I didn't learn anything. I would say what I've learned in my household, though, is a day without Nutella is a day without sunshine in my house, right?
Does everybody, you have to explain what Nutella is if everybody doesn't know what Nutella is.
Nutella is like chocolate spread. That's insanely amazing. And if someone doesn't have it in my house daily, it's not a good day.
Breakfast, lunch, and dinner. It's all 3 meals,
Breakfast,
right?
lunch, and dinner, because you could smear it on a pancake. Luke has 2 different color lightsabers because we've watched every Star Wars at least 4 times.
Mm-hmm.
And if you apply club soda quickly, the red wine does come out.
Yeah.
That's what I know.
All right. That's good. So any other serious things to share and comment? I know we've got some closing thoughts. Jen, any other questions that have come in that we need to tackle?
No,
okay.
we haven't had any additional questions. Thank you.
Okay. And look, we kind of spent some time here with the audience kind of going through some stuff. We are all available to talk about this offline. We're happy to share our Know Before You Go tool built in PeopleSoft by a dynamic HR leader on our team. And quite frankly, we should be commercializing it. Oracle should be paying us for it. But we're happy to share that information willingly and openly to any member of C2HR and any sort of member of our HR community broadly. We also were willing to share our communication tools, like anything that we use to create our ongoing communication, our notification process, our response in terms of what does the office space look like. I know there are some companies that have yet to bring people back, or if they're bringing people back, they've only brought a small number of people back. We're at the place where some of our buildings are 25, 35, 45% occupied. We're keeping within the measurement of the CDC and the measurement of the county or the state that we operate in. We're compliant, but we are having people in. We're having people on shifts, A shift, B shift, C shift. So you come in, work 5 days, then you're home and remote for a week or 2. Then you come back. So we have all kinds of things that we're more than willing to go deeper in and share with anybody that's still thinking through this, working through this at the early stages of it versus mid game, which is where we are. I think the C2HR website has a lot of great resources as well, so you should go to it. They've done a phenomenal job. Pam and team and Michelle as the president currently have done a phenomenal job of rebranding and formatting and reorientating us on that website. It's modernized, it's user friendly, it's got current content, it's searchable, etc. So hats off to them as an industry kind of community coming together. And as I said earlier, I'm super proud of the Charter team, the Charter business team, the Charter leadership team, the Charter HR team. People like Robyn and her team, and people like Suki and her team, and all the others are working 24/7. I think there's an adrenaline in that. There's a thrill in that. There's an excitement in that. I'm helping make a difference. I'm helping drive the business. But I do fear, and I am concerned about exhaustion and burnout. And I want you all to try to do your best to kind of take some time and download and digest and sort of reimagine or re-energize yourself, as Suki said. So let's go to a few of the final thoughts on our last slide, and we'll wrap it up if we can just turn that. So I said this on the panel the other day, which I was super proud of being with fellow CHROs from A&E and from Comcast, very, very talented people, and then a great panel host, Chris Powell. But my whole thing there was listen, learn, and lead. And I've been doing that through this process. I've frankly been doing that since I came here as an HR leader, having never been a CHRO before. But this year was at its premium of listening, learning, and leading. I had to listen regularly to our head of safety, and listen regularly to our GA group, Government Affairs group, and listen regularly to our legal function, which was guiding us through this, and understand and then learn and then adjust and then lead through this pandemic. And I'm sure all of you have done the same, Robyn and Suki and Danielle, in your areas. Big thing for me is, I think our company, and I'm proud of it, has faced this crisis head on. We didn't divert from it. We didn't back away from it. We didn't sort of say, oh gosh, what do we do? We sort of said, we have to deal with this. We have a customer-facing, frontline-oriented organization serving communities all around the country, relying on our internet, relying on our connectivity. So we have to face the crisis head on. We have to lean into our strengths, the agility, the innovation, the playbook. Strong relationships, that was mentioned earlier. I think those were built because we've been working together for the last 5 or 6 years. That leads to trust. And we followed our playbook, which is the way we operate and what we think is best, which is going to be different from company to company and team to team and organization to organization. So thank you. I know we're at our time. We really appreciate it here on C2HR to be part of this panel and part of this virtual event. And let us know if you need anything. We're here to help. Thank you, Suki. Thank you, Robyn. Thank you, Jen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
Thank you.